Yeah, I'm Madeline Drake. I'm an independent consultant in housing and care, and I've worked in housing and care for longer than I care to remember, but over 30 years, and for the last 15 as chief executive of our housing and care providers. So I guess my role is to talk about housing and care, about assistive technologies and cognitive systems in housing and care. The context is that over the last 40 years, care has moved from large institutions to working in people's homes. And over that time, we've experienced person-to-person care becoming more expensive, and therefore we're not having the economies of scale anymore. We're relying more on assistive technologies. At the same time, we've got huge cuts in government funding, and we as care providers are competing against each other to win £1 million worth of care contracts, delivered often in 50-minute slots, though I have to tell everybody here that elder care, which is the 50-minute slot thing, is the bulk of care in this country. But when you look at mental health care, learning disability is very well funded, and physical disability is very well funded. So it's not all as the picture is being presented here. But nevertheless, it's cut. It's cuts and cuts and cuts, and competition. More volatile funding. Each individual person carries their own funding package. It's not block funding anymore. And personalisation is the buzzword. That means that if I was caring for you guys out there, each one of you would have a care plan agreed with you, your family, me as the care provider, and the commissioner of funding, normally the local authority or the health authority. And that care plan is the Bible. So personally tailored and very detailed. I want to address 3 questions. In fact, the first one, I think, has been dealt with quite adequately over and over in the conference where I've been, but I mean, the answer obviously is that supplementing human care is something we can now easily say is happening. Replacing it is another question, and I was quite intrigued to hear Paul's presentation, thinking these robots are great, but if one of them goes wrong, I can't subject it to disciplinary procedures as chief executive, and would I be held liable for anything it did that it shouldn't do? The second one, do these technologies offer something in themselves which don't just supplement or replace human capacity, but also add something in itself which improves the life and well-being of people in care? And what are the main barriers for applying these technologies? So I want to start with 4 stories, because the one thing I've got over all you guys out there is that I've seen it done and done it to some extent. Mind you, I don't know, maybe some of you have as well, but I want to just offer you some real-life examples. So these aren't real names, but Becky was a 25-year-old woman living, when I first met her, in a large ward in a psychiatric hospital. She had a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. She was catatonic, would not talk to me, wouldn't even look at me, and basically sat still all day. When I next saw her 18 months later, she was living in a complex that my organisation had built in her own bedsit flat as part of this complex. She rushed out of her door when she saw me coming up the drive and gestured me into her flat. I went in, and she had laid out tea with cakes and biscuits she'd made herself. Her walls were lined with pictures she painted herself. And that was all made possible not by human carers, although obviously there were human carers in there, but by extremely smart home technology, which of course, as we all know, offers some of the most important things for people, all of us, and for people in care, which independence, the enhancement of our own capacity, security, safety, and the ability to actually achieve our own creative objectives in our home without eyeball to eyeball or human assistance. The The second example I want to give is George, a paraplegic man who at the age of 35, having been extremely active, had a motorbike accident. He was in an organisation I was running which was primarily for elder care, but he was an elder care complex. And he invited me to his barbecue. He was a highly sociable person. He was paralysed from the neck down. And his life was made possible because he had an adapted wheelchair. He also had adapted computer systems which enabled him to earn a small living creating laminated art. And he did this all by movements of the mouth. He did have 24-hour support and a highly adapted home, but his ability to, he went shopping by himself, he didn't have any human carers with him, and he was able to have an active social life, which meant that although he was basically extremely disabled, he was still very active and very positive about his life. Now these are fairly standard examples which some of you may already know about in how technologies can improve people's lives. The third one is perhaps a little bit more surprising because it raises these issues of privacy and surveillance and people's concerns about the security of their own data. This example is of a 6-flat complex which we ran, which was actually funded largely by the legal and health authorities. And we took families into these flats who had been, or one of the parents of whom had been accused of sexual abuse. They normally would have gone through the court system, and there was some unclarity about whether or not the abuse had taken place. So these families were referred to our very highly bugged flats. And these flats were all monitored by a central complex, which was staffed at all times by one person, and then there were 2 roving staff roving around the complex. The bug that was linked back into this monitoring hub flicked around every room in each flat at random, staying in place 2 minutes for each room and then flicking round to another one, but at random, could pick up the slightest rustle or sound which was not expected. And actually this was very effective at saving an awful lot of families having been split up, and also obviously saving a lot of money in imprisoning perpetrators and also putting children into care, let alone of course the human distress caused. But this shows that people are prepared to accept intrusion into the most intimate aspects of their lives when the costs are outweighed by the benefits. This is a very effective system, but quite expensive, and I think is no longer in operation. The fourth example I'd like to give is of what I call, and they were called word boxes to me by their users. These were people with moderate learning difficulties or disabilities living in dispersed environments, and I was being interviewed for the chief executiveship of this organisation. It's a national organisation. I have to point out these organisations are big business, and this was a £100 million organisation. I came second, but the interview partly consisted of being interviewed by a panel of people with learning disabilities. Now some of these were extreme Asperger's, some of them were Down syndrome, and a range of disabilities. Some of these people were verbally, well, they were all non-verbal, some by choice and some because they were organically so. And what happened was that they recorded their questions into their word boxes, and each question would be attached to a button, and they would press the button and that question would come out and I would answer it. And And they used these word boxes all the time. They were extremely fond of their word boxes. They took them everywhere with them. It was very simple technology, I'm sure. All these things I'm talking about are well-established technologies, but enabled these people to actually take an active part in selecting their own staff, deciding, asking questions about what they might do for their holidays, what they might have for dinner, every aspect of their life that they would not normally be able to ask questions about, verbally at least. They were able to do so using this technology. In the same way as, I think it's Paro, that seal, became a loved object, these word boxes, although they're little boxes, became loved objects. So there's more, this really, I'm trying to answer the question I asked myself here, which is, what do these technologies offer? Yeah, that human interaction doesn't. Almost everything I've talked about actually could not be offered by a human operator. And so in the world where, you know, in the care world where mostly people are rather phobic about everything we're discussing today, it's been my role to try and promote these technologies. And I was on a board of something called Assistive Technologies in Care, which in fact folded because of lack of funding. Looking at what is good care, any care which increases control promotes dignity and independence. Any care where expert skill is matched to need and it's personalised, when it's timely and present when it's needed, when it's non-intrusive, when it's reliable, consistent, and when it adapts to change in client capacity. Now, so often care is not like that, but the examples I've given are those where it has been, and some of the technologies we've heard about could enhance care to achieve those characteristics. What are the barriers? Very quickly, care risk. Well, I think people may be aware that with corporate responsibility, I would be the one to go to prison if one of your robots went wrong, so I'm going to be worried about robots coming into my care practice. Care risk is the biggest problem we've got. Informed consent, the Mental Capacity Act and deprivation of liberty legislation determines how we go about delivering care, and these technologies, of course, will raise issues about informed consent. The inertia is a huge barrier. Organisations of 2,000 staff, we have huge infrastructure, so managing huge infrastructure, policies and procedures, training, maintenance and so on, and you're going to be introducing even the slightest new style of practice into that requires a huge amount of corporate work. In that corporate work, we've got multiple stakeholders with distinct interests. The funders, government, providers like me, the clients and their families, and all those interests conflict, and there's a huge debate about non-human care. Biggest is the human and technology interface, making it simple enough and cheap enough for people who are underpaid, very heavily stressed in their work, and need an enormous amount of training to provide care in very stressful situations. How can you help make that possible using these technologies? I'll leave it there because I know we're in a hurry.
Thanks very much, Becky.
Thank you.